All right, so welcome to our note-taking and study strategies workshop today. This is part of our Study Smarter, Not Harder series of workshops. And the ACPC hosts these workshops every semester for you. So first up, we are going to talk about note-taking. First, I'm going to go over some more general information, like some more general tips about how to best take notes, and then we'll go over a couple of specific systems for note-taking at the end. So before you even get to class, you should start thinking about your notes. Because if you go to class prepared, then you'll be way more successful whenever it comes time to sit down in the classroom and learn everything. So before you go to class, we definitely recommend that you kind of do a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be talking about in class that week. So, if you had chapter 3, is the chapter that you're covering this week, maybe take a look over chapter 3 in the textbook first, look at the stuff that's in the Canvas module, just kind of peruse and see what you're going to be talking about. That way, when you sit down to actually take notes in class, it's not all going to be a surprise to you. You'll already be a little bit familiar with some of the concepts, and it'll go a little bit more smoothly when you're taking notes in classes. We also recommend that you review your notes from your previous class. So I don't think it's any secret that most classes are pretty sequential in nature. So, usually what you learn this week, the stuff you learn next week will build upon it, and so on and so forth. So it's important to keep reviewing notes as you go along. You don't want to forget about your notes after you take them. So to prepare yourself for class, we suggest that you review your notes from the previous class. And this kind of goes along the idea of like surveying the material before class, but, even look a little bit ahead. If, chapter 3 of your class covers 4 weeks, kind of see what you're doing this week and what you're doing next week, what you already did, and see how you can connect things and see how it all fits together, so you can have a good idea of how the course is structured and everything. It's important to go into class feeling pretty solid, right? So you don't want to go to class already, confused about the stuff that you learned in the last class. So if there was anything that you felt like you needed clarification on, go to your professor's office hours. Some classes have TAs. You could talk to the TA. You could even meet with a tutor in the Learning Resource Center. Do something before the next class to clear up any confusion you had from the last class. So whenever you go into class, you're feeling pretty good about what you already learned. And then obviously, if you miss class, it's important that you still get the notes, because, we all know that sometimes instructors test you on things that they only talk about in class. So if you miss class, then you miss that really important information that could be on an exam. So, if you have a friend in the class, get it from your friend, the person that sits next to you. I know some classes are virtual, so there is like a participants list in Canvas, and you could reach out to one of your fellow classmates and ask for their notes. But don't neglect that, because you could potentially miss something. So that's what you should do before class. Now let's talk a little bit about what you should do during class, and we'll talk about some specific techniques you can use during class as well in a little bit. So the first thing is that some students find it really helpful to utilize PowerPoints during class. So if your instructor uses PowerPoints in class, and not everyone does, but a lot of people do, if your instructor uses PowerPoints in class, maybe download it or print it out beforehand and take your notes on the PowerPoint. That way you don't have to like rewrite everything that the instructor has shared on the PowerPoint. You're just taking your own notes on top of that. You don't have to duplicate what the instructor has already put on the presentation. Sometimes, and I know this happened to me a lot when I was in college, sometimes like notes can get out of control. Like you're just, there's so much to write down. There's so much important information that afterwards you look at it and you there's really no order to it. So sometimes some students like to use color coding to kind of organize their notes while they're taking them. So if you're going through class and you have like a little set of highlighters with you or something, if your instructor shares with you a definition, highlight it in yellow, and then highlight every definition that they talk about in yellow. And if, it's a history class and they mention an important date, highlight it in green and highlight all of the important dates in green. You can use any kind of color coding system that really works for you to help differentiate between the material that's on the page and then also highlight important points. And when you're in class, not only is it important to take notes on what is on the board or on the projector or on the shared Zoom screen, you also want to pay attention to what the instructor is saying. So your notes should be a combination of stuff that the instructor has written on the board or provided in some kind of written format and what they say. So because whenever you combine those, usually they make a lot of sense, and that'll give you a pretty good idea of what might be on the next exam. So it's important to be really actively listening in class so you can take notes on what the instructor is saying. And then lastly, take notes in a format that works for you. So I know I really like to take notes in an outline format, where you indent and use different bullet points and stuff like that. That really works for me. Some students like to do a little bit of concept mapping, which we'll look at in a little bit. Implement color coding, personalize it to however works for you, because you are going to be the one using these notes. So, try to find something like in a system or some kind of method that works for you. And so this might take a little bit of trial and error, but you'll find something that works for you and then you can implement it consistently. Now, after class, a lot of these points on this slide here really boil down to get yourself organized. So, you take notes in class and maybe they were a little bit messy, or maybe they were kind of out of order, or you took them in your science notebook for your history class because you forgot your history notebook or something like that. After class, you want to make sure your notes are really organized. So whenever you use them in the future, you don't have to try to figure out what you were doing or like get everything in line. It's already all organized for you. So that includes, separating your notes into different sections. Like if you have a binder that's all sectioned out. I also like to strongly emphasize the fact that you should be reviewing your notes. So it's not just enough to take notes. Like that's a really good first step, but it can't end there. You have to also review your notes. So I recommend that you review your notes within 24 hours of a class. When I was in college, what I really liked to do was, if I had a class on Monday at like 2 p.m., I tried to make sure I reviewed my notes before I went to bed that day. That way I didn't have to reteach myself the material if I reviewed it, 4 days after taking the notes, because you're bound to forget a little bit of something there. So if you review your notes 24 hours or less after class, then that helps solidify it in your brain. I personally really liked rewriting my notes, which I know sounds crazy, but I liked reviewing my notes, not only just like reading them, but also rewriting them, because that gives you a chance to implement some color coding or to put it in a more organized format. Maybe you're a really messy writer like I am, and you can take your time and write nicely. Not only does it help you get your notes more organized, but it also helps you get, helps you relearn the material and helps you teach it, review it to yourself. And, as you go through and you read your notes, mark it up. Like I said, do some color coding, underlining stuff, highlighting stuff, mark the main points. Or if you notice that the instructor said the same thing like 4 times, maybe, underline it or star it or something, because if they said it a bunch of times, chances are it's a little bit important and it might be on an exam. This is also a great time to draw connections between what you have learned previously in the class and what you have learned in other classes. And you can even write these connections in your notes. Because like I said before, most classes are pretty progressive in nature, so they build upon each other. So how can you take what you learned today and apply it to what you learned in, the second week of the semester? Drawing those connections helps you really solidify what you're learning. So one technique that we like to recommend in the ACPC is Cornell Notes, and this is just one note-taking method. So this is not the only one that's out there. This is not the one that you must use, but this is one that we like to use and suggest to students because it's a really organized way of taking notes, and the way it's set up, you can use it kind of like an automatic study guide. So the way it works is you take a piece of paper as shown here, and you draw a line down the middle of it, or you fold it in half. And on the right-hand side, that's where you take your notes during class. So you'll have the whole left-hand side of the page blank during class, and you'll take your notes on the right-hand side, like you would, in like an outline format or whatever works for you. And then after class, that's where you fill in the notes on the left-hand side. That's where you can get a little bit more organized. You can highlight the main ideas. You can ask questions in that area. So, if you have, a definition, you could ask yourself, like, what is the definition of X in that column? And then the answer to that would be found on the other side. You could draw diagrams, depending on the class, that might be really helpful. You could draw diagrams or a little bit of concept mapping on this side. And you could also put in prompts to help you study. And then at the bottom of this page, you draw a horizontal line, or at the bottom of your section of notes. So like chances are you'll probably have more than one page of notes for most classes. So the summary goes at the very end of your notes. And that's where you take a second to reflect and review. So this is good to do after you've taken your notes, after class. And this is where you write a quick summary about like the big bullet points, the main ideas that you learned, things that you think will be important to know on your next exam, or things that you think will come up again in a future section of that, class. That way you can use this summary as a quick reference whenever you're studying. So you already have a little bit of a summary of every class period that you attended for the whole semester. So when it comes time to study for an exam, you can reread those summaries, refresh your memory on that. You can use the cues column to develop questions or flashcards from that. And it's all right there in one page. So it's really, the Cornell Notes method is really nice for keeping things organized and getting you prepped to study, because you'll want to make sure you use your notes when you study. And, like I said before, it's not the only way to take notes, but this is a really well-known and really useful way to take notes. So if you've never tried this, I recommend trying it, right? It's worth a shot. If you feel like your note-taking needs a little bit of an overhaul, try the Cornell note-taking method, and see how it works for you. Try it for more than just one class period, because it'll probably take you, a class or two to get the hang of it, but you might find it helpful. So it's definitely worth trying. Now, one thing that we like to talk about, because I think some students, sometimes you might feel like, oh, this textbook, like I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to read it and I'm going to highlight everything in it that's important. And then you end up just like highlighting most of the chapter, or you sit there and you're reading and you get to the bottom of the page and you're like, I have no idea what I just read. I'm sure we've all been there. And that's because, you aren't taking notes in the textbook in an active manner. So first of all, I guess I should have stated this before I went into this, but not only should you be taking notes in your classes, but you should also be taking notes when you read your textbooks, because your textbooks have so much information in them that if you sit down to study for an exam later, you don't want to have to go through and reread everything or relearn everything. If you have notes, then you can use that to study. So you should take notes while you're studying, and it gives you it's a little bit more active, so it allows you to pay attention to what you're reading and actually learn. So we like to use in the ACPC this technique called SQ3R, and that's because it's survey, question, read, recite, review. Those are the 5 steps. And this is really effective for taking notes in a textbook. So I highly recommend this. This works for me. I highly recommend that you do this, especially for classes where you feel like you always zone out when you read the textbook, or classes where the instructor pulls a lot of exam material from the textbook. Try SQ3R. It'll be really helpful. So I'll just go over each point briefly here. The first step in SQ3R is survey. So that's where you kind of take a peek at what you're going to be reading in that chapter. Pay attention to the headings. If there's different sections within the chapter, what are those headings? If there's anything bolded or italicized, make note of that. Read the end of chapter questions and summary, which I know sounds kind of counterintuitive, but you should read that before you even get started reading the chapter. And then also pay attention to any captions on pictures or diagrams or maps or any kind of imagery that's in the chapter. So then the second thing you'll do is you'll turn the main ideas into questions. So if, the section header for within the chapter is, the War of 1812, and that's just like the section header there. Turn that into a question. What happened in the War of 1812? Who fought the War of 1812? Turn the section header into a question. And you can do this like in the book if you, bought the book, or if you rented it and you're allowed to write in the book. You could do that right in the book, or you could do that on a separate piece of paper in your notes. And then once you've done that, you'll read. Read with a purpose, though. You will read the section below that header to answer the question. So if the header was the War of 1812 and you want to know who fought in the War of 1812, as you are reading the section below that header, read to find the answer. And this really helps promote active reading, because if you know what you're looking for and you are actively looking for something, that keeps your brain going and you'll be less likely to zone out. And then once you find the answer to the question, maybe highlight it or underline it or write it down on the piece of paper if you're doing this outside of the book. And then the next step is recite. So this is where you go through the chapter and you do that for each of the headers. You read all the paragraphs, all that good stuff. You're done with the chapter. Go back to the beginning of the chapter and ask yourself the question and see if you can answer it. So if you can answer the question, who fought in the War of 1812, then you learn the material. If you ask yourself who fought in the War of 1812, you can't quite remember, that's okay. Like, you aren't always expected to know the answer to everything right away. That's fine. But that might draw your attention to, okay, so this is a question I can't answer. I'm going to want to make sure I study this and I am able to answer this question. And then lastly, review. You should review your SQ3R notes every couple of days. I will generalize this to say you should review all of your notes every couple of days, even when you know the material. So like I said before, classes are very sequential and progressive. So it builds on itself throughout the semester. And sometimes you even have a cumulative final exam where you're tested on everything from this semester. So, even if you knew this stuff from week 1 in week 1, by the time you get to week 15, you might be a little rusty on it. So it's important to keep up reviewing your notes from your textbooks and the notes that you're taking in classes periodically to make sure that you are still remembering the material. And that'll help ensure long-term understanding of the material, not just short-term. And I had mentioned before that concept mapping is one possible note-taking method. If you're a little bit more like a visual learner, you prefer not to learn in like a linear method, like an outline or something, you could use note-taking, which could be helpful. You can use concept mapping, which could be helpful in both note-taking and studying. So you could either take your notes in like this map format where you have, you know, the main idea here, and then you have the different points branching off of it with even more branches off of that. So you could do that while you're taking your notes, or you could do that after the fact. So if you have an exam coming up next week, you could do a concept map as a way to organize everything you've learned from the last couple of weeks on a topic. So concept mapping is really helpful for both note-taking and studying. And I'll share with you at the end where you can find more resources on how to do concept mapping. Now we're going to talk about study skills. And for this portion, I'm taking a little bit more of like an overview approach to study skills. So there are so many different ways you can study, you know, when it boils down to it, so many different techniques. These are the top 5 study strategies that you should be implementing in order to make your study session successful. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're doing flashcards or whatever you're doing to study, if you implement these 5 study strategies, you'll have a successful study session. So the first one is practice learning. So one really great way to learn something is to practice it, right? Probably the most common way people do practice learning is with flashcards. But there are other ways that you can do it. And this is basically where you go over the material repeatedly in order to learn it or in order to master it. And, you know, the slide even says practice makes perfect. So this is really great for concepts, you know, like definitions, dates, people, you know, stuff like that, where you could fit it on a flashcard, or it's something that you could, you know, practice repeatedly like that. This is important because whenever you practice something, it not only stays in your short-term memory for you to just like, you know, regurgitate on a test in a couple of days, but the more you practice it and the more you actually master the material, it stays in your long-term memory. So you'll remember this for your final, not just the exam that you have like tomorrow or whatever. Distributed practice is also an essential technique here. Basically, this boils down to not cramming. So I know we've all been there, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything for my physics exam tomorrow. I'm just going to cram for the next 16 hours and stay up all night so I can study. That truly is not effective. Like, please don't do that. Distributed practice is where you space your repetition practice, like what we just talked about, where you space that over a period of time and you break it up into smaller, shorter sessions. So cramming really fatigues your brain, and at a certain point, you just can't like keep any more stuff in there, right? So it's not an effective way of, you know, learning material for mastery. Instead, you should do distributed practice, and that takes a little bit of time management. So, you know, if you have an exam on Friday, you shouldn't wait until Thursday to start studying for the exam. You should start last Friday and do a little bit of studying spaced out throughout, you know, the whole week to get yourself prepared. So you really do want to avoid cramming, and instead you want to do distributed practice where you do a little bit over a longer period of time. You can do this with interleaved practice. So interleaved practice is where you basically just like mix things up. So, you know, within one session, let's say you are like, okay, I have 2 hours right now where I don't have class, I don't have anything to do, I'm going to study. This is my study time. Instead of just doing flashcards for 2 hours, mix it up. Get your brain moving in different ways. So maybe you do flashcards, and then maybe you read your notes, and then maybe you have some true false questions that you answer, or maybe you do some practice problems, or, you know, whatever is most appropriate for the class. Mix up what you do within a single study session. This can even be applied to like mixing up the subjects that you're doing in a single study session. So if you have 2 hours right now, you could do math for an hour where you do some flashcards, you do some practice problems, and then you could do your history for the next hour, where you write a summary of the chapter and you know, maybe do a little bit of testing with one of your friends or something like that. So interleaved practice is where you mix it up, because this is especially important for exams, because sometimes the exam doesn't present the material in the exact same way in which you studied it, and that can kind of throw you off, right? Like, haven't you ever just been like, oh my gosh, I knew all of my flashcards, so why couldn't I write that essay on that exam? You know, if you mix up the different ways that you study, you will be more prepared to take the knowledge that you do have and kind of show your mastery in different ways. So your exam might have you do short answer or essay or multiple choice, or you have to like do a practice problem where you write out all the steps that of how you got your answer. You know, mix it up when you're studying. So when you're presented with these different scenarios in the exam, you are ready to, you know, display your learning in that way. Another study strategy that you can use is summarization. And this is really helpful, you know, whether or not you use Cornell notes. So this is part of Cornell note taking. Remember, it was the last step. But even if you don't use Cornell notes, you should still be summarizing. Summarizing is a great way to kind of check in and refresh yourself on everything that you've learned, clarify things that maybe you don't understand, and really emphasize the important things that you think are going to be on your next exam or that you have to include in your paper or whatever. So, you know, your summary doesn't have to be like, you know, 2 pages long or anything. It could just be a couple of sentences, you know, hitting on the main ideas of what you learned. And this also gives you the chance to put what you're learning in your own words. So whenever you take something that you learned and interpret it and put it out in a summary, that really helps solidify your learning and improves your mastery of the material. And then lastly, it's important to focus whenever you're studying, which I know that sounds silly, but it's not just enough to be like, oh, I have 3 hours to study today, but then half the time you're sitting on your phone or you're just kind of like watching Netflix or whatever. Like, you have to make the most of the time that you have, and you need to focus during your study session. So for me, I have to put my phone out of my eyesight. I can't even see it. I'll be distracted by it. Even if it's off, I'll be distracted by it. So, you know, put your cell phone out of sight. Find a place to study that's really conducive to you learning. My recommendation is like, don't study in your bedroom, because that's where you go to sleep and hang out and stuff. And, you know, you might be inclined to take a nap instead of studying. So if you go to the library, or a lot of the residence halls on campus have study spaces, go to one of those. Go to, you know, a local Panera or a different room in your house or something. Find a place that is really conducive to you to focus, you know, free from distractions that'll get you off task here. And, you know, if you are the type of person who likes technology and is distracted by it, use that as a reward. So if you are like, okay, I'm going to study for an hour now, and then I'm going to give myself a 10-minute break to scroll through Instagram. That's totally fine. Use it as a reward. If you get through an hour of solid studying where you were focused, that's awesome, and you should be rewarded for that. So, you know, use your technology as a reward, or maybe you are really motivated by food. You could get a snack. Do something that after you have set a goal for yourself for that study session and you've reached that goal, do something to reward yourself. And then we do have a lot of resources available on the ACPC website, because, you know, I highlighted some different note-taking and study strategies today, but that is by no means the only stuff that's out there. There are so many different ways to take notes, or so many different things that you can do to study. We talked about SQ3R, but there are other ways to read your textbook in an active way. So we have compiled some study skills and time management resources on the academic help page. So if you go to barron.psu.edu/acpc, and then you click on the academic help link there, you can go to the study skills page, and you can, here's a little screenshot. You can see that we have some stuff listed here. There's even more down at the bottom that you don't see on the screenshot. And you can kind of find what works for you. So if you try SQ3R and you do that for like 2 or 3 chapters and you're just not feeling it, it doesn't really work for you, try something different. Maybe next time you do concept mapping. There are so many different ways to study that if you try something and it doesn't work, that doesn't mean you just don't know how to study. That just means you haven't found the method that works best for you quite yet. So it's a little bit of trial and error, and it's just finding what works for you.